And greetings from an overcast, grey, rain-soaked Dublin here in Ireland. And thank you so much for that kind introduction. So this image will be familiar to all of you. Some of you might have been shocked by it. Some of you might have predicted it. Others amongst you, I imagine, are still trying to make sense of it all. What happened on January 6th was, unfortunately, years in the making. It happened in the midst of a global pandemic and a global infodemic, but it came after years of what can only be described as an information crisis that now demands, I would say, our urgent attention and really a radical new approach to content moderation, which puts humans in the loop. So how do we get to that watershed moment of January 6th? Well, I'm someone who passionately believes in the importance of providing people with quality, trustworthy news and information so they can better understand the world around them. I'm fortunate to have spent over 15 years working in journalism, in traditional newsrooms, in the world's first social media verification agency, Storyful, and for Facebook on its journalism partnerships. And I've seen how an industry has continued to grapple with transitioning from a yesteryear when our media citizens looked like this to now this. And in between those two images I've just shown you are years of disruption, years in which everyone became a publisher. The means of distributing, consuming news became so vast, and we ended up with just more content everywhere. And that was largely a good thing, making us more connected, better educated, more engaged with the world around us. But in the era of move fast and break things, algorithms were built to keep us endlessly scrolling for hours through streams of news feeds with clickbait content. And it was designed to have us constantly chasing those dopamine hits, when we all are breathlessly checking back for the likes and comments on a post, a picture, a video. All the while in the background, that's fueling ad dollars. And an entire industry, through those years of disruption, an industry, a system was built for that speed, the clicks, the scale, the emojis, the hearts, the emotions. And in the process, we broke the connection, the trust between people and quality news and information. And all the while, newsrooms, news publishers, broadcasters, they were erecting new paywalls and new subscriptions, which meant that you were leaving a lot of people with only the free, only the clickbait, and often divisive content. Meanwhile, other newsrooms were closing their doors. In the United States, a quarter of all newspapers have gone out of business in the last 15 years, creating what we call news deserts that have left 1,800 communities without a local news outlet at the start of last year. Way back in 2010, 10 years ago, in this very fast-moving environment that I've just talked about, I was working for a team called Storyful. And we were essentially the internet's first fact checkers. We liked to think of ourselves almost like as a human algorithm, that we were using technology to find signal in the news of social media and all of this new content being uploaded through all of the platforms in real time. And we were using technology to help us find it, but then we were just using old school journalism to verify it, the source, the location, the date of content emerging from as far back as the Arab Spring and everything that has followed since. But as much as we spent a lot of time trying to verify that content was true and trustworthy, that the world media could use it, we were spending a lot of time, even back in 2010, debunking content, trying to demonstrate how it was false, misleading, or just plain false. And we became in Storyful like social sleuths. From the earliest beginnings of the company, we were using a hashtag daily debunk. And again, back in the earliest years of 2010 and beyond, in those moments of breaking news, people were inserting themselves into the moment with sometimes unclear motivations. You'd see people who are pranksters just trying to dupe people. There's a picture of a shark, I'm sure some of you have seen, that just for years and years it has followed us around the internet every time there's a freak weather event, particularly in the United States. That's just clearly photoshopped. We've seen military regimes stage videos trying to spread propaganda using old materials from other locations and timelines for their own purposes. And all the while it was, pretty clear, even back then, that people who were doing this, there were four distinct motivators. For some, in creating this disinformation was political, it was propaganda warfare. For some, it was financial, it was about ad dollars per 1,000 views. They could make money on this. For some, it was psychological, it was just their own personal satisfaction, that moment of virality, notoriety. For others, it was social, to reinforce their sense of belonging to their communities, to their tribes. And everything I've just shown you, this mistrust, this manipulation, this sense of overload, really created a wicked problem. And at this moment of lost trust through the last 2 decades in particular, more clickbait, fewer newsrooms, we really saw these organized campaigns of deception that can do real world harm. That's what stepped in the vacuum. And a wicked problem by its very definition is one that's difficult, sometimes impossible to solve, because you've got complex, incomplete, contradictory, changing requirements, and there's rarely ever one solution to solve for it. In Kinsen, my technology company here in Dublin, Ireland, we define misinformation. That's false, it's misleading, it's content that's shared by people within their personal networks. And it can create harm, but it's often spread accidentally, it's without malice. On the other hand, you have disinformation. It's campaigns of organized deception with the potential for real world harm. The key attributes of disinformation, it's intent, it's coordination, it's threat. And regardless of whether it's misinformation or disinformation, it preys on people's vulnerability. Any crisis, whether it's COVID, this global pandemic, or election fallouts, people's anxiety levels will be higher, which in turn breeds just anxiety. And in order to resolve uncertainty and to sometimes reduce our anxiety, people seek out information about the threat. They're doing what humans have always done. They're trying to make sense of a confusing situation. And I'm sure all of you have had that experience where maybe a relative or a friend sends you something that they think is helpful, but in that moment of sending it to you, they're being used to spread false news. Today, thanks to the work of organizations like First Draft and our own work in Kinsen, we can trace how moments like January 6th came to pass. Disinformation often starts on the anonymous web. Think platforms like 4chan and Discord. It'll move in then to closed or semi-closed groups like Twitter DM groups or Facebook or WhatsApp groups. Then on to conspiracy communities or Reddit forums or YouTube channels. And then on to open social networks like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And unfortunately, at this point, it can sometimes seep into the professional media. So what are the trends that we're seeing that platforms and public communicators are dealing with right now in this moment of a global infodemic and an information crisis? Well, firstly, just as you have regional strains of COVID, so too disinformation campaigns. There are critical variations in global disinformation memes as they manifest themselves in different markets or languages. So you could have a disinformation pattern in an English-speaking market, can be quickly detected, disrupted there, but then emerge in a more virulent strain through a network indigenous to a regional market or a language. And there, when that happens, where it goes from here over here, is a super spreader event in a sense. In Germany, for example, some groups have already begun to attack the Bundestag elections. They're scheduled for later this summer or potentially the fall. And because of the pandemic, there's been a discussion in Germany for some time about whether an expansion of postal voting is necessary to prevent outbreaks of COVID-19. Now, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? One far-right activist organization has been sowing doubt for some time about the reliability of postal voting. Ever since Trump used Twitter to attack mail-in ballots, it has been repeatedly claimed that the postal vote in Germany is very susceptible to manipulation. The second trend that we've seen this past year has been how the network can share intelligence. Our experience of disinformation in Kinsen is that it acts as a connective tissue between extremist networks with no previous history of collaboration. They're starting to find each other and connect all of these narratives. For example, we've seen the central tenets of the QAnon conspiracy translate into anti-vaccination networks in Europe associated with the extreme left. We've seen how conspiracy theory groups have piggybacked on the introduction of 5G here in Europe in particular, as an opportunity to mislead and misinform when it comes to COVID, when it comes to vaccinations. And the 5G coronavirus conspiracy theories, they're particularly challenging right now because they bring together people from very different parts of the political spectrum. Thirdly, a central feature in the spread of disinformation from fringe forms to mainstream communities is the infection of conversations hosted by influencers. Conspiracy thinking is very persuasive when it emerges organically from a community that might be focused on positive communications around issues such as health, well-being, social activism. In many cases, disinformation spreaders consciously evolve their language to infect an existing conversation or unconsciously influence an influencer. Take the spread of pastel QAnon or conspirituality on Instagram. That began with innocuous hashtags like Save Our Children and Great Awakening. There are, however, solutions, as was in Storyful when we pioneered social media verification using technology, expert journalism. We brought the same philosophy to Kinsen, where we're combining technology and expertise to help content moderators and safety professionals radically reduce the threat of coordinated campaigns of deception. We consider ourselves trusted flaggers. We're an early warning system for disinformation. We are equipping moderators and trust and safety teams inside platforms with the context they need to make the right decision at the right moment. Now, as you know, in the past, content platforms, they've outsourced this human function in the past to sometimes low-paid, undervalued contract staff. We've also seen in the past companies use humans to train the data sets for machine learning tools that will ultimately replace the humans. Now, in Kinsen, we contend you need both machine learning and humans to confront this wicked problem. Core to our vision of content moderation is the design of algorithms which empower editors and fact checkers rather than the other way around. Humans, we believe, have a critical role in improving the accuracy, the precision of natural language processing classification. When you think languages, topics, categories, entities, taking all of that and matching it to narratives, dog whistles, bad actors. So in Kinsen, we have humans at the start and end of our technology. We're working with people world over in different markets, languages, people who are absolute experts in different narratives, and they're researching, collating memes, those bad actors, the narratives, dog whistles, labeling, tagging every single day, and adding them to a knowledge graph. And we are building a knowledge graph which we hope will be the world's most comprehensive and agile machine readable database of information risk. The knowledge graph should solve the garbage in, garbage out problem that complicates the automated detection of disinformation. The knowledge graph will become, we believe, the engine of any human in the loop solution to content moderation. And so in all of this, think about how tech-enabled editors will be able to outperform the machine as well in spotting the subtle evolution of human language, how the changing pitch of the dog whistle evolves. You know, think about how through continuous monitoring, that labeling, that tagging, that editors can help build knowledge graphs that reflect the evolution, the migration of disinformation campaigns across the internet. And ultimately, based on all of those insights, the scoring, the understanding of the risks, the threats involved, that you could have platforms, content moderators decide what action, if any, is required on their own systems. So when you take the expertise of researchers world over, journalists, fact checkers, and plug them into that knowledge graph, you can start to match videos, podcasts, and everything else, you know, on the open internet against it. And so in real time, you start to see a word like Sharpie pop up in Arizona amid allegations on voting day in November, or you start to see accusations about double voting in the aftermath of the election. And these are insights in real time that platforms can review to decide, is there a course of action that is required? And I think for all of us, I come back to this central question all the time of, is your work helpful or harmful? You know, to be constantly thinking about unintended consequences of our work, to look around corners, to think about, you know, is my company trying to dominate an industry by any means necessary? Is that helpful? Are you trying to replace meaningful human culture? Is that helpful? And I implore all of us to think about that question, because clearly since January 6th, platforms have been asking that question of themselves, and we've seen them take new action, removing accounts, removing content, demonstrating that they take it seriously. But we also have to guard against knee-jerk reactions right now if we don't first confront the underlying issues of January 6th. In the months and years to come, we're going to have a lot of difficult conversations around Section 230 around the Digital Services Act here in the EU. Regulation is clearly needed to help this wicked problem, but it must be regulation targeting the right things, because there is a difference, after all, between good regulation and bad. And often, as we know, past behaviour is the best predictor of future behaviour. I hope we never see things like January 6th again, but it does require us to rethink how we tackle the wicked problem of disinformation. Think about how we pre-bunk these coordinated campaigns long before they go viral, how we connect the dots between activities in other countries and other platforms to enhance our understanding of this network, and to ensure that we continue to put humans in the loop as trusted flaggers, matched to machine learning, so we can detect, disrupt, organise campaigns of deception that can do real-world harm. Thank you.